Hey everybody, what's going on? Fabian Calvo, founder and president of the Note House and creator of the Resourceful Real Estate Academy. And in this video, I wanted to talk about the implications of quantitative easing and the real estate market. Now, wow, quantitative easing. I don't think I've ever read a real estate investing book or a real estate article for that matter, or heard the mainstream media link quantitative easing to the real estate markets. I mean, again, it's one of the reasons a majority of real estate investors end up losing money is because they don't understand the major driving factors of the real estate market, one of them being quantitative easing. Now, what in the world is quantitative easing? Because it sounds like a very fancy word made up by a bunch of college professors, and you guessed right, that's exactly what it is. What it really is, or what you and I would call it, would be money printing. I mean, quantitative easing basically is what governments do because they have to create more liquidity in the market. So take, for example, the United States. We have massive deficit spending. We don't have enough money that we're bringing in to pay for all the deficit spending. So what is done is that basically the Federal Reserve, or the central bank of the country, in this case America, creates all kinds of money. They inject it into the economy to pay for that deficit spending and hope that it stimulates the economy. Now, in America, we've done it for a while, but we really ratcheted it up since around 2009 when the Federal Reserve increased their balance sheet from around $800 billion to close approaching $4 trillion. Now, most people hear that and it just goes totally over their head, and that's kind of what they want you to do. They want you to hear this and be like, that doesn't affect my life, I don't really care, but it does. If you're interested in real estate, if you're a real estate investor, if you're involved in any way, it really affects your life. And we have a perfect case in point in Japan, who has tried basically the same approach now going on for 2 decades, and we'll cover what what's happened. Has it worked? Because that's what they're hoping will happen here, is that they're hoping that they can create enough liquidity that they can stimulate the economy where the real economy will somehow show up and they'll be like, hey, I'm over here. And they'll basically take it and run with it. And then the Fed can magically start unwinding or, basically selling off all the treasury bills, all the mortgage-backed securities that they're buying under quantitative easing. But it'll never happen. So that's between you and me. Now, Japan and quantitative easing. They've been doing this for a while. Here's a chart of housing prices in Japan. Really, you see commercial, residential, and industrial. And you see that it peaked in the mid-'80s. And I don't know if you remember this. I mean, I was a kid kind of back here. But this is when, like, your grandparents and everybody else was afraid that the Japanese were going to control America and they were buying everything. Well, that's this time here. Then, basically, the market collapses completely. And they're around where they were back in the 1970s, late 60s, okay? In this time here, Japan has rolled out a massive quantitative easing. In fact, most recently, they just injected or started quantitative easing number 8. Now, in America, we're in number 4, really number 3, number 4, because they call it so many different things, but you could argue it's 4, we're on our way to 5. And in Japan, it hasn't worked. Prices are still very much depressed. It's not working. It has worked for their stock market, which is a little bit easier to manipulate, but it's not working with housing. Now, is it working in the U.S. real estate market? Well, it is, to a certain extent. I mean, CaseShiller index today showed that a 0.3% rise in February. It's the lowest level since 2010. Another indicator that came out, which I think this is very telling, and if you have heard my whole theory, and I'll break that down real quickly in a second, is that home ownership has now plummeted down to a 16-year low. So that's probably going to get more press than the quantitative easing, or because the quantitative easing is getting no press. But what does this mean, and what will ultimately happen? That's a really, really important thing. And I want you to just keep following this here, because the Fed is committed to boosting prices. They have to. And why do they have to do that? Because in America, real estate is such a huge factor of the economy. In Japan, people basically stay. They don't sell homes that much. They stay where they live for a very long time. Here, the average time in a house is about 4 years. It's a very big part of the economy. Think about the title companies, the movers, the landscapers, everything that ties into real estate. So the Federal Reserve knows that if they want to stimulate the economy, if they want to get a real recovery underway in the U.S., they must have the housing market begin to recover. Now, the three big driving factors of the real estate market right now are investors, which I've talked about for some time, the manipulation of the interest rates, keeping them at basically 0% or very low, 3% for first-time home buyers, FHA, which now owns over $1 trillion of subprime debt, becoming really the new countrywide, and the supply. All this I cover in my real estate micro documentary that I released a few months ago called Real Estate's Big House of Cards, Real Estate's Big Secret, because it's all being manipulated because, again, the Fed's committed to boosting prices. They're committed to boosting prices because banks still contain trillions of dollars in toxic debt. And so in order to save those banks, they need to boost prices in this whole pumping stage so then that those banks can sell all their toxic assets in the market that's rising, because we still only have roughly 3% equity for every mortgaged piece of real estate. So if you get every mortgaged piece of real estate together in America, only 3% of it roughly is equity. The rest of it's all debt, right? So they would want to see much more equity so that people can sell, then go spend money, and they can stimulate the economy. That's their commitment. Now, here's another chart that I want to show you real quick. Here's the CaseShiller index going back to 2000, and you see somewhat of a similarity between Japan, right, and the U.S. See, the U.S., Japan spikes, they fall apart, they're printing money like crazy, it really doesn't work. Here in America, the spike plummets, kind of, the stimulus measures that they're doing, not really working, but then something starts to change right around here, so right around 2011 or so, and this is where I think prices are going to go. Now, again, this isn't real. I want to stress, because sometimes people are like, oh, Fabian, you think the stimulus stuff is working. I want to stress that this is all manipulation at an unprecedented level. Never before in history has there been the amount of financial rigging, if you will, as there is right now. In fact, there was a great article by an MIT professor. He couldn't have said it better. A guy by the name of Andrew Lowe. He says, quote, this is talking about all the manipulation, all the rigging taking place in the global economy, quote, it dwarfs by order of magnitude any financial scam in the history of the markets. Very well said. I couldn't put it better myself. So this is where I think we're going with housing prices, because here's what's different about the US and the QE versus Japan and QE. The difference is that you have big mega banks here in America that are controlling the supply. So they've taken all the supply off the market, and there's only so much supply. Then they're flooding the market with money. They haven't done it yet as much as they will, but they will. In the article or the story that came out a few days ago, the news that came out a few days ago about housing, home ownership at a 16-year low is just more fuel for politicians who I believe after the midterm election will be coming out. It's already starting, but will be coming out much more and saying, hey, we need to basically give out more loans to people. Home ownership is part of the American dream. Everybody should have a right to buy a home. Let's refuel subprime all over again. The third part is the interest rates. The Fed's committed to low interest rates. That's what's fueling car purchases, home purchases, everything else. And that's what little economic growth we're having now is fueled by the low rates. And finally, the investors. Many of these investors who are tied to the Fed and who are tied to the big banks are buying billions of dollars worth of real estate during this pump stage. But when we get to this part up around here, around 2014, 2015, that's when the home ownership loans, the no money down loans will be coming out like crazy. And that's likely when all these guys will begin to sell, all the big money will begin to sell. So quantitative easing in America, will it work compared to Japan? Well, it hasn't worked in Japan, but in America, it's a little bit different. We have the world reserve currency. We have these big banks that Japan necessarily doesn't have. And we have different demographics with respect to buying and selling than Japan does. So I think you could say it will work. Ultimately, it will lead to a bigger crash. But in the short term, you will see housing prices continue to increase because of the unprecedented historical stimulus being injected into the market by central planners around the world. I'm Fabian Calvo. Thank you so much for watching. I'm out.